Chapter 9. Suspicions of Witchcraft. And there Dark was, alone yet again in the depths of the cold, wet Rah, with gossamer everywhere, as if there'd been no human through the place in 1,000 lifetimes. He made his way back across the bog. Again he avoided the lower field, walking along by the low stone wall to get to the gate at the far end. He was only halfway along when he thought he saw a figure, a human, run through the stones ahead of him. He discovered that he was out of capacity for shock or fear. Instead of running away, he just walked on till he got to the spot. There was no gap in the wall under the elder bush there, and no person could have been hiding in it. He was about to move on when he heard a voice. He looked again, but he couldn't see anything. "That's a grand night now, all the same," the woman's voice repeated. Dark didn't respond. "No voice, no matter," the voice sighed. "He did well yesterday with that fellow the other night. Don't ever let the talk of a person like that get past your ears, because if you give him one chance, if you consider for just 1 minute what dirty proposition he is putting to you, he will get directly to your heart and poison it." "I did consider it for a lot more than 1 minute." "Who are you?" asked Dark. "Don't mind that. There's a bit of stuff that you were looking for." "Are you noble lady?" "Thank you. Though not everyone calls me that. You will find little pellets of it in a nest at the back of the hay bales in your own sheds." "Rat shit is the only thing there that I know of," said Dark. "You could call it that if you were very coarse. Those are not just any rats. Those fine fellows I've been feeding up specially. I don't have time to make the paste of it myself, so I leave it to you." He caught a glimpse of her scurrying up the wall and her stout tail disappearing over it. He guessed that this was as much as he was ever likely to hear from her. Back in the house, he went to bed for a couple of hours. He was already starting to count on Joey to do his calves in the morning. Sure enough, Joey walked into the kitchen as Dark was coming out of the bedroom. But Joey seemed out of balance and confused. At first he wouldn't talk. Dark just waited. "When I went to collect the eggs this morning, they were all gone," Joey said after some time. "Robbers. And they didn't even put respect on the eggs. The best in the world. The blackguards broke one on the way out. The rest are gone. No eggs this morning. Sorry, Arthur." "Sorry about that," said Dark, who had never heard before of a robber who took only duck eggs. Joey plonked a sandwich on the table. 2 slices of stale white bread with afternoon tea biscuits crumpled between them. "Thanks, Joey," Dark said. "Something tells me I know who took your eggs, and who they were fed to." "Who?" he asked, excitedly. "I don't want to say because I don't know for sure," said Dark. "Fair enough," nodded Joey, wisely. "But if I'm right, it is a one-off. No need to worry about it ever happening again," said Dark. "That's all right then, Arthur," said Joey, his familiar smile breaking back on his face. "The young man got hungry during the day then, did he?" He was gone out to feed the calves before Dark could correct him. Dark just couldn't face into collecting the rat droppings, not before school, and he needed to collect more of the canker too. He wasn't getting down to the hospital again until tomorrow anyway. As the school day wore on, he was planning how he would collect the canker on his way home and then gather the rat droppings before it got dark. He would take his time, make sure he got plenty of each thing, mix it up properly. He texted the Red, "Need a spin to hospital first thing tomorrow." The text came back instantly as though he had been expecting the request. "Will be in Kill at 7 in the AM, good buddy." At break time, Kevin came over to him, leaving Kira standing alone for a while. Before he talked, Dark said to him, "Look, Kevin, that wasn't reasonable what I asked you to do. Don't worry about it." "No, it wasn't reasonable. Nor was it reasonable to ask me to not tell anyone about your situation. There are people who might like to know." Dark didn't feel like guessing what Kevin was trying to say to him. He just shrugged. "All the same," continued Kevin, "I had a bit of luck. As he explained, talking really quickly and smiling to himself, Dark did not have the heart to tell him that his interest in the medical side of things had waned as fast as it had surged. Kevin talked about trawling academic medical sites for email addresses, running apps that hit the external access system with multiple combinations of email stem usernames and low-grade password choices, abysmal database security and more. "You are a legend," said Dark flatly. "What did you find?" What was it you hoped I'd find?" "I dunno, anything strange?" said Dark, not expecting anything at all. "Well, there certainly was that," said Kevin. He had a printout of the report in his back pocket. He gave it to Dark and sauntered away back across the grounds. Dark scanned through the pages of Connie's notes. There were lists of all the tests done. He understood some of it because that snotty doctor had been right. He had been reading stuff on the medical websites. He went down to the bits Kevin had marked with an orange highlighter, all under the heading Miscellaneous Observations. Troubling case. Idiopathic in extremis. Negative on all tests. Presented to several physicians. Discussed online with others. Still no insights forthcoming. Patient was discharged after first presentation on assumption that recovery would be facilitated in home environment, but home-based follow-up neglected. Illness continued advancing aggressively and patient had deteriorated to a severe degree by the time he was readmitted. Now dangerously ill. Patient has extraordinary high pain threshold and has already outlived expectations. Team entirely nonplussed. Senior Registrar Riley pointed out only modern comparable ailment is chronic wasting disease, only found in elk. Likelihood of contact, let alone interspecies prion transmission, considered very remote. Nevertheless, suggests checks for brain lesions post-M. As a curious aside, SHD, Leah Cannon, has found only one similar human situation in literature. The source relates to papers written in a hospital in the Congo in 1902 by a Dr. Faith Trant. She describes strikingly similar cases of patients presenting with chronic pain, rapidly deteriorating physically, with no signs of any known ailments or agents. As in our case, Trant reported relatives claiming that the patient had been bitten by rodents, but with no bite marks visible. Patients invariably died. SHD Cannon submits that Trant, without the benefit of modern knowledge, began to put store in the relatives' suspicions of witchcraft. Regrettably, even with the benefit of all our 21st century knowledge and technology, we find ourselves unable to make any more progress than did Dr. Trant. Dark reread the report, his eyes arrested by certain phrases. Outlived expectations, checks for brain lesions post-M, suspicions of witchcraft. There was no part of the report that didn't make Dark feel sick. He tried to look straight ahead. He had a job to do. It was what Connie wanted and therefore he would do it. He was going to get through the day and get through the night and then his job would be done. After that he was staying in Cork at the bedside from tomorrow morning regardless of who told him to leave. He was staying with his mother and Connie from then to the end. The bell went, but he didn't go in yet. He had never felt such weakness as came over him. He folded himself down on his hunkers with his back to the gable wall, transfixed with the image of someone taking a scalpel to Connie's brain post-mortem. After a while of sitting in the drizzle with his head in his hands, he was aware of two people standing next to him. He looked up. Kira was departing without looking at him. How had she known he was here? She had brought Mammy Una. He wished she would take Una away with her again. He understood that the old woman was kind, but he had no use for that. Una put a surprisingly hard hand on Dark's head. He stood up and blew his nose into his jacket sleeve and said, "Sorry, Miss Moriarty, I'll go back to class in a minute." "Don't get weak now, young man. This is no time to feel sorry for yourself," she said, in a voice that startled Dark. She looked up into his eyes. There was no hint of the usual kindness. Dark found himself wondering, as often, what his dad would think of him now, waiting for advice from a woman who everyone knew was Bats. His dad was a rational, sensible man. What would he make of his wise old Artie losing his grip on anything that made sense? As if reading his mind, Mammy Una spoke to him, fast and firm. "That's no good to anyone, dead or alive. Stay strong for the people in this world who need you." Dark nodded. "Now, I don't want you to come back into class," she continued. "I want you to go to see to whatever it is you think you have to see to. There'll be time enough for sadness later." Dark left his bag in class and headed out the road on his bike. He had his mind back on things that needed doing. He remembered something Connie always said: you can't control what happens, but you can take hold of how you think about it. He could manage by taking hold of just one thought at a time. First, he needed to get some more of the canker. The little piece he'd taken previously had crumpled and got mixed with lint and bits of straw in his pocket. It was just as well he'd left school early, because it turned out that the Heron's instructions had become harder to follow this time. The section of the riverbank where the old crab tree had been surviving had been cleared and graded with the track machine. The valley of the Brown River was designated a special conservation area, but this stretch belonged to Salty, who didn't enjoy living things that weren't making him money. The bank had been freshly seeded with grass for his cattle. Dark did not like his next thought very much. He guessed that Salty would not have burned the removed timber and scrub yet. He would be waiting to burn them with his plastic wraps and empty spray drums, when he usually fired on Sunday mornings when environmental inspectors were not scouting. For that, Dark guessed that he would have gathered the timber up near the house somewhere. Dark didn't ever wish to be near that house, but he had no choice. He knew he had only one chance at this. He was going to do it precisely as instructed. He did not dare assume that canker from the other crab trees would do. He had a job to do, one step at a time. He was on autopilot now. He walked around under the shadow of the ditches to reduce the chances of being seen approaching. Grey light reflecting from the clouds made it impossible to make out whether anyone might see in there. He had to just hope Salty wasn't home as he made a dash from the cover of the hedge. With his fishing knife, he peeled cankered bark from several branches. Soon he had his pockets stuffed. He was running back to the hedge when he heard an enraged shout. He turned to see Salty leaning out of a dormer window in the roof, looking through the telescopic sights of his rifle. His head was crimson. He screamed, "I've seen more of you than I ever want to see again." "Daddy, don't shoot," came the cry of a small girl from another window. "You'll scare Millie." Millie was unaware of the danger and came trotting over to Dark as he ducked behind the pile of timber. He didn't really believe that Salty would pull the trigger. He was too shrewd to expose himself like that. But just to be on the safe side, Dark held the friendly grey pony's halter and walked down the field, crouching under her neck. When he was out of range of a .22, or so he thought, he gave Millie a pat and thanked her. She started to canter off. He heard the bullet whiz past him and heard its impact before the sound of the shot reached him. Millie crumpled to the ground, with a bullet gone through her eye, 3 yards wide of its mark. Salty had to be using a hornet with deer hunting rounds. That meant that Dark was still well within range. He needed to get to the next field very quickly. As he threw himself over the gate, another bullet zinged off the top bar. For some reason, Salty was losing it. Back at home, collecting the rat droppings no longer seemed the worst part of the mission. There was a fine deposit of them, some with fragments of duck eggshells still visible. He used his mam's spatula to collect a pile of it into a spare bag. After he had fed the calves and walked the dogs, he sat down on the kitchen table to make the poultice. He used the rolling pin to squish all of the droppings into a paste and then mixed the crumbly brown bark with spots of red and white on it through the paste. He put his blend into an after-eights tin and stuffed that into the inside pocket of his parka. He phoned Joey and asked him if he could come over. Joey was there in a few minutes, pants wet to the thighs again from the direct route across the river. "I'm going to stay in Cork from early tomorrow. Until when, I don't know. Can I leave you in charge of the place here? You know, to keep feeding the calves and come over a couple of extra times during the day just to check up on everything and to look in on the dogs." Joey got a very serious look on his face and nodded slowly, as if there was some secret message in what Dark was asking. Banner will surely take care of McLean's business, he said. Rest easy. Dark had no doubt that the calves and dogs would be royally cared for, so he dispelled the slight anxiety that he had just registered. There could be nothing to worry about. Joey gave Psycho a pat and backed out the door, still nodding at Dark. As he sat down to look at his laptop, he became agitated. He started wondering, what if Connie didn't even make it till the morning? He phoned his mum to see how things were. She was still sitting at the bed. She said that one of the doctors was spending almost as much time at the bedside as she was. The doctor was very attentive to the pain medication and was watching for any changes. Leah Cannon, said Dark, absent-mindedly. What? How did you know that, Arthur? Said his mother, suddenly awake. Dark was stumped for an excuse, forgetting that he could just have known her name from that first meeting. After a minute he said, I am thinking of coming down tomorrow morning, ma'am. He expected her to say no, that there was no point and that he should go to school, but she said, that's probably a good idea. I'm sure you've organised for the animals to be taken care of. Yes. They say goodnight, and Dark went out to spend some time in the Ra. Somehow, his fear of walking into a salty trap in the fields had evaporated. He had persuaded himself that having shown too much of his hand, Salty was rattled now. In the Ra, the old man greeted him warmly. And how are you doing now? I've been better, but still standing, said Dark quietly. What tomorrow will bring, I can't say. Aha! Shouted Conan. The young man has a tongue in his head as well as a heart in his chest. You'd better watch yourself there, Bal, or before you know it, he'll be cutting the legs from under you, short and all as they are. The old man raised his hand, and they all were silent. He stood in front of Dark and said, You will travel with us tonight, son, but we won't be seeing you again for a while. So I wanted to help you with your question. You are not the first young man ever to visit us here. We met another young man some years ago. He was tall and dark, with honour in his eyes. When you are trying to remember your father, look at yourself. Stay true and be proud. Dark looked all around. They were all staring at him. The old man changed his tone and sat by the fire, saying again, But for now, you can leave all those thoughts behind you and come with us.